Welcome back to This is a Commander channel, where this is a Commander channel, and today I'm going to talk about the possible future of Commander. So as I'm sure many of you already know, the Rules Committee has recently shifted management of the Commander format over to WotC, and I'm not here to discuss that decision, nor any of the reasoning behind it, nor the events leading up to it, but my focus instead will be on the new power level system proposed by WotC, and how the way it is handled could actually be an amazing thing for the Commander format, possibly. Specifically for casual Commander players, I myself am not a CEDH player, so while I will mention it a bit, I do not claim to be an expert on CEDH, and again my focus will be on the casual side of all of this. Also, we don't know a lot of the official details about this tier system that WotC is possibly going to implement. This video will be based upon the little bit of concept stuff that they've shown and discussed publicly so far, and I'll be running with that. I'm not stating that this is how WotC will handle the tier system. I'm also not stating that I think that this is best or what's right for casual Commander, but if this is what is gonna have to happen, this system be implemented, then this is simply how I would devise this system if I were in control to make it the best possible thing that it could be. So, based on the concept that they showed on the live stream, we can see that they have a plan to do a 4-tiered or bracket system, with cards in bracket 1 being considered low power that can easily go into any deck, and then cards in bracket 4 are high power that can only be in the highest power decks. Based on what they said on the stream, and based on the fact that they have Armageddon as one of the 2 examples in this concept image, it's clear that bracket 4 will not only contain individually powerful cards, but also cards that players typically don't enjoy playing against. Mass land destruction is generally looked down upon in casual Commander due to how it can add a large amount of time to a game. It can often take 30 minutes or longer just to get to turns 5 and 6 in a 4-pod, and the reason for that is that a lot of the players are simply building up their board states and ramping, but then an Armageddon just resets everyone's lands, and they're probably now not sitting with a hand that has 3 to 4 lands in it like they kept as their starting hand. Now, I'm not going to go over the individual cards that I would place into these brackets. I for sure do have opinions on the cards that I would like to see placed and where, but that is a discussion for another day. Rather, I want to focus on how you classify your deck based on the cards it contains from the brackets. I don't believe that a deck should be labeled as the tier for the highest card that it contains. For example, my meme deck of birds, or ladies looking left, or oops all hats, or even something like every card has Richard Kane Ferguson art, etc. These decks are ones that are likely to contain a whole lot of tier 1 and tier 2 levels of cards, and maybe they contain 1 or 2, maybe even 3 cards from bracket 3 or bracket 4. In which case, I don't believe that they would be considered a bracket 3 deck or a bracket 4 deck. 1 or 2 or even 3 powerful and competitive cards in your deck does not mean that your whole deck is powerful or competitive. If your RKF art deck contains this version of Force of Will, I think that most players would agree that yes, Force of Will is one of the most powerful counterspells in the game. However, if that is the only counterspell in your entire deck, then your deck isn't exactly a controlled deck through counterspells. It's probably not really leaning into being a competitive deck. And that's because one of the biggest aspects of making a Commander deck competitive is the consistency. Running multiple of the best, most efficient counterspells in the game means that you'll have a higher consistency of being able to counter another player's game-winning play or protecting your own game-winning play. By themselves, cards like Vampiric Tutor and Demonic Tutor are not great cards. They will not win you the game or save you from losing the game. Being tutors, they are only as good as the other cards in your deck. If you don't run a single other bracket 3 or bracket 4 card, but you do run both vampiric and demonic tutor, then it is safe to say that your deck is still just a tier 1 or tier 2 deck. This is why I believe that there needs to be a threshold for the number of cards in a bracket before your deck is to be labeled as that tier of a deck. What is that threshold? Is it 5 cards? Is it 10 cards? I don't know. I will say that I don't think that the threshold for bracket 3 and 4 need to be the same. I believe that the number of cards needed to be classified as a 4 should be different than the number it takes to be classified as a 3, and the number of cards it takes to be classified as a 3 should be different than the number of cards it takes to be classified as a 2. If the threshold for bracket 4 were to be something like 5 cards, or maybe 10 cards, does that mean that you're going to have a whole bunch of players running around with just 4 or just 9 cards in their deck from bracket 4? Oh, for sure. But this leads into my next 2 points. Point number 1. This tier system is not to replace the Rule Zero talk or the pregame talk. It is to accompany it. Just like before when people would say, oh yeah, my deck is just a 7. We will still chat about our decks before a game to make sure that we're all in the right ballpark to have an equally challenging game for all 4 players. Are all 4 of the players going to be social butterflies wanting to do this talk? No. Do all players have the same opinions on what cards are powerful and how powerful their decks are? No. That's why the "my deck is just a 7" meme came about. That all players describe their decks as just being a 7, it was a very subjective thing. If my close group of friends all have really powerful decks that aren't quite CEDH, but like 90 to 95% of the way there, then while playing in a pod with them, my equally powerful deck will only win about 25% of the time, and it will seem like a pretty average deck. But then, when I take that same deck to a new LGS, maybe it's one I've never been to before, maybe I'm traveling or something like that, I have no clue what their meta is like. I have no clue what their average decks are going to look like. And so when I do tell them my honest opinion about my deck based on my personal experiences with it, it, on average, only wins about 25% of the time, and it never really becomes the arch enemy in my games. It's as good as the other decks I face off against. Then I'm not trying to mislead these new players, but the information I have given is skewed a bit. It does have some bias to it. The thing that I like about what this bracket system can do is that it can make that pregame discussion a little easier because it provides some objective information to it. Now I can just straight up say, my deck is a tier 2 deck and it has 3 bracket 3 cards in it. And if I even want to, I could tell them exactly what those 3 bracket 3 cards are. This takes less than a minute to say, and there is no bias in there. It doesn't matter what my opinions are on a card. Like, for example, maybe Smothering Tithe is going to be classified as a bracket 3 card, but maybe a lot of people would actually consider it to be more of just a bracket 2 card. Well, in that case, when those people have their pregame talk with me and they say that their deck is tier 2, but they have Smothering Tithe in it, now I can look at their commander and see, oh, it's mono white with God Eternal Ketra, or it's Esper with Verena Lich Queen. Well, then all is good. But if I see that their deck is actually mono white with Mondrak Glory Dominus or Esper with Marneus Calgar, those are commanders that specifically synergize with Smothering Tithe. And if that's one of their bracket 3 cards that they mentioned, then I know that there's going to be a lot more impactfulness from those cards. And I can still go into that match knowing that. And that is point number 2, that these brackets do not need to be mutually exclusive. With our current 1 to 10 system, that, as we all know, is really just S7 or CEDH system, there's nothing to stop a player from saying, hey guys, all I have on me is my CEDH deck, so I'll join the pod if you're all right with that, and I'm okay with me being the clear arch enemy for obvious reasons. and then all the other 3 players grab their most powerful non-CEDH decks that they've got, and they play out their game. This means everyone knew what they were getting into, and we had clearly different power levels being used. That doesn't have to change. There is nothing stopping you from telling the pod that your deck is very much a Tier 3 deck, with a majority of Bracket 3 cards, and even a few Bracket 4 cards, and then the other players know what to expect with their Tier 2 decks, that are just using maybe 1 or 2 Bracket 3 cards. Just use the bracket system as a way to provide more context to your deck's DNA, but don't treat it as 4 individual ban lists for 4 different sub-formats of Commander. Tier 2 decks can still play against Tier 3 and even Tier 4 decks. There will just be a little bit more context given to players' expectations to eliminate the occurrence of feel-bad games. In addition to this, it will be harder for people to pub stomp. If you've been playing Commander for a while, you've probably encountered someone saying, "Oh, it's okay, my deck isn't one of those kinds of Beamtown Bullies decks," only for it to be exactly that kind of a Beamtown Bullies deck that gives you a Leveler or Eater of Days, those cards that just end the game for one player. There is always that kind of player that specifically undersells the power of their deck just to get every bit of advantage that they can to win, and then after that game they reply with, "Well dang, this deck has never done that before." Well, after they just played every one of the expected staples that you would think of. So with the bracket pregame talk, when everyone is looking for a level 2 sort of a game, and one guy says, "Oh yeah, my deck is just a Tier 2 deck, but it only has 4 bracket 3 cards," and then he proceeds to play the game and uses more than 4 bracket 3 cards, then you can call them out on their BS for lying. Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they didn't remember that their deck has those other cards in it. And that's okay, that does happen, but you can remember this, and if someone does that tactic often enough, then you can identify the pub stomper that is frequently going to be giving false information about the number of bracket 3 and bracket 4 cards that they run in their different decks. So now back to a bit on the structure of the bracket system and combos, because obviously a card like Exquisite Blood by itself isn't insane. I don't think anyone would suggest it as a bracket 3 or bracket 4 card. However, when paired with Sanguine Bond, then we get the classic combo. Similarly, cards like Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation are by themselves not all that crazy, but together they're an insanely efficient combo to win the game on the spot. So clearly, for combos, we batch them together on the brackets. If you run Thoracle, then your deck will not be nudging itself towards Tier 3 or Tier 4, but you run both of those pieces in your deck, and now that is bumping your deck closer to those tiers. Does every single combo need to be listed on the brackets? No, that's obviously an impossible task that no human could ever pull off. I think we only need to include some of the commonly known ones that are actually relative to showing up in an average game of Commander. Do we expand the combos to 3-card combos or more? That's a bit trickier of a question. Polyraptor and Marauding Raptor lead to an infinite amount of Polyraptors being created, but nothing here leads to a game win. In fact, in many cases, it ends the game in a draw if no player has instant speed ways to interact. If the controller of them has an instant speed interaction to stop their own loop, or a free sack outlet, or just sack outlet of some sort, then they do at least have a way to stop this endless loop from ending the game in a draw. But if they don't have a 3rd or 4th card, then they don't win with this combo on that turn, and they'll probably just get cleaned out by a board wipe after they pass their turn. But if they do have a haste enabler, then we have a 4-card combo. But there are so many things in green and red that could give haste, so how do you define this combo? Do we just include all of them in conjunction with these other 2? Heck, you could even have something like Aether Flash instead of Marauding Raptor. Or instead of haste, you just use something like Perforos, God of the Forge, or Impact Tremors. And this is just one single grouping of cards for a 3 or 4 card combo. So I doubt that WotC would be focusing on these 3+ card combos. I could see them possibly doing this and including them if the commander itself is part of the 3-card combo, and I could very easily see them placing much higher priority on 2-card combos when the commander is one of those 2 cards, like the classic Godo Bandit Warlord and Helm of the Host, as now your deck only needs to actually draw or tutor for just 1 card to get access to this combo, and in the case of Godo, he has a built-in way to search for that combo piece. Now, if we revisit that whole threshold idea, how do we handle combos? I don't think that a 2-card combo that is in bracket 3 should count equally as 2 individual cards that are both bracket 3 cards. So, for example, if the threshold would be to contain 5 cards from bracket 3 to classify your deck as a tier 3 deck, then you could run 3 individual bracket 3 cards, and then you have 2 cards in a bracket 3 combo, and that's basically like you're at 4 points worth of bracket 3, not the 5-point threshold. So you'd describe your deck as, hey, mine's a tier 2 deck that contains 3 cards from bracket 3, and it does contain a bracket 3 combo. Again, very, very quick to say. So is this a lot of extra work on the players? Yes, it is for sure. Is this system going to be intimidating for a new player to Magic or a new player to Commander? Oh, for sure. You can also argue that Commander as a format is not a format that anyone new to Magic should be playing, but that is yet another topic for another day. I wouldn't expect a new to Magic or new to Commander player to be concerning themselves with this system. Just how I don't think that any new player is taught about Commander by their friend or coworker, and one of the first things that they go over is explaining power levels and pregame talks for what their deck is capable of. With all the people that I have taught Magic to since getting into Commander, and for all the Magic players that I have met when they're first starting to get into Commander from whatever format that they came from, I always tell them to just tell people, hey, I'm new to this. And that's it. That's the same thing for those brackets. I still encounter players that have been playing for months, and in some cases, a couple years, and they'll drop a card on the table during a game only for the rest of us at the table to have to tell them that card is banned. They legit didn't know. So clearly, there are a ton of players out there that will not memorize or learn all of these cards in these respective brackets. And that's okay, because this is just a casual format. One thing that I think WotC should do is that since they're now the official managers of Commander, they should start to include things in their precons to help with new players. They already include those posters and life trackers and token cards that are put into the precons, so what if they were to just add a card in there that describes the brackets briefly and informs them, the player who just bought this precon, of how their precon is a tier 1 deck. And they should probably try to face off against similar bracket 1 or 2 decks until they become more comfortable with their deck and have even modified their deck with some new cards. What if there's a card that has a link or a QR code that will take them directly to a page of the official WotC website that has a more detailed description of the brackets, and then also the list of all those cards for those brackets? In addition, other websites like Archidect, Moxfield, EDHREC, and others can include a bracket stat. EDHREC can include that bracket number in the section underneath the card showing the prices, the rank, the synergy number, things like that. Sites like Moxfield and Archidect can just tell you what your deck list is after you've populated the list with cards. No need for you to go hunting the cards down. I personally have over 40 constructed Commander decks, so that's pretty intimidating to think about keeping track of all the different makeups of my decks. Which one is tier 2? Which one is tier 3? Which one is tier 3 but has only 4 cards of tier 4? All that kind of stuff. But I'm not cycling through all 40 of them all the time. Typically, I just have around 10 to 12 with me when I'm going to an LGS, and from week to week, I'm only swapping out 1 or 2, and the others stay relatively consistent. So it's much less intimidating when I think about it that way. The final thing that I want to talk about is how WotC should go about classifying new cards. And I think that the obvious answer is that they just don't. Sure, there are times that when a card is spoiled, like Voja, Jaws of the Conclave, and everyone can just tell instantly that that card is just too powerful for their playgroup. But then there are always those cards like Smuggler's Share and Bootlegger's Stash that were over $40 and $50 respectively, and people thought they were going to be the most busted cards out there that every deck in those colors would want. But now they're just around $1 and $2 respectively. So clearly, I don't think that WotC should be classifying any newly printed cards until they have been out for an amount of time. I don't know what that time is, maybe 6 months. And then a shorter amount of time for an emergency classification if they were to, God forbid, print another Nadu. So, in summary, in exchange for a little bit more effort on our end to remember specifically some key cards in our decks, this bracket system, if handled well, could help to streamline the Rule Zero pregame talk. It could remove subjectivity from that talk and reduce feel-bad games for mismatched and misunderstood power levels. It could make it more difficult for pub stompers to deceive players, especially multiple games in a row, and do all this while not stopping you from still using your unmatched tier decks if you just want to ignore all of this and play the games like you always have. Is the system I have discussed here perfect? No. And I don't think that any human could ever create a perfect system for matching paper Commander players against each other, especially in casual. Is there a better system out there? Oh, for sure. I'm not a game designer, just a guy that really loves to play Commander with friends and also random players that I've never met before, and I don't like to waste my time or their time when we get games in. And what I've described here is something that I personally think would be a fairly good way to go about doing this bracket system if I were put in charge of it and told that it's gonna happen. You can't choose to not implement this system, so just devise it how you think it would work best. So what do you guys think? Again, this video is not a discussion of the recent events leading up to all of this. It is not a discussion over whether this system should or should not be implemented, just how you would like to see it implemented. What would you like to see done differently than what I've described here? What cards do you hope to see placed in bracket 4 and bracket 3? What do you think most of your decks will probably fall into? Which category, which bracket? Anyhow, that's all I've got for today's episode. As always, I hope that all of you have found this video to be entertaining at least, and I hope that a few of you, it gets you thinking deeply about Magic and the future of Magic. I'm cautiously optimistic. I really hope WotC pulls this off. Yeah, have a good one. Ta-ta.